if I was to tell you what the opposite of stress is, the answer might surprise you. Now, most of us assume, and I count myself as someone who has made this same assumption at one point in my life, most of us assume that the opposite of stress is peace, or maybe even a state of calm. But in actual fact, peace or calm are more representative of the absence of stress, not the opposite. The true opposite of stress is kindness. But let me rephrase that, because I know you might be thinking, well, okay, stress is a state and kindness is perhaps something that you say or do. So let me reword it. The opposite of an experience of stress, and what that experience is like, is an experience of kindness. And what that experience is like, the opposite of an experience of stress, what that's like and what happens physiologically inside the brain and body, is an experience of kindness. And what happens and what that's like and what happens physiologically inside the brain and the body. In fact, one of the really simple studies that pointed towards this effect was done by psychologists a few years ago, where they sent people a little online form at 9:30 every evening for 3 weeks. And they were asking them for two numbers. The first number was a stress number score. So roughly the number of stressors they experienced during the day, in work and life and finance and relationships, all these little things that tend to stress us during the day. The other number they asked them for was roughly the number of kind behaviours they had shown, maybe things that they'd said or things that they had done during the day. And then they crunched all the data together, and amazingly what they found is on the days when the kindness number score was high, the stress number score was low. And on days where the stress number score was high, the kindness number score was low. And it was like a seesaw, when one went up, when kindness went up, stress came down. But let me just point out, it doesn't mean that if you're being kind or having experiences of kindness, it doesn't mean that stressful things don't happen, because of course we know that life happens. What it does mean is when you have experiences of kindness, it takes some of the sting out of stressful events. So the same kind of things might happen, the same stressors might be present in our lives. But if we've had experiences of kindness, then some of the impact of those stressors is mitigated to some extent. In other words, it doesn't sting, doesn't seem to get under our fingers and hurt us quite as much. Isn't that absolutely incredible? And we can see that pattern all throughout the brain and body. And for example, stress dials up the activity of a major region deep in the brain that plays a role in stress, worry, fear, anxiety. And this is actually why it's challenging, so it's difficult sometimes if you're feeling stressed to just think positive, and that's because stress is an actual physiological effect. So there's a physical effect in the brain where you're dialing up the intensity of the activity level of this key region of the brain. So that's why it's sometimes difficult to think your way out of it. But here's the thing, an experience of kindness can dial the same region down in the opposite direction. Also, a physiological effect. So it's not just kindness isn't just something you do and something that kind of feels nice. It's a physiological effect in the brain, but also all throughout the body. Let me give you another couple of examples. So it's well known that stress increases blood pressure. Well, it's also now known from research that kindness decreases blood pressure. It's also well known that stress can suppress immune function. It can put pressure on the immune system. We also now know from research that kindness supports immune function, and we know that right down to the genetic level. Now, I've created videos on both these individual effects, the effect of kindness on blood pressure and the effect of kindness on the immune system. We also know that stress is one of the major accelerators of the aging process. Well, we now know also that experiences of kindness can slow the rate of biological aging. Let me just give you a brief example. We know, one of the ways we know this is you can look inside cells And there's little end caps on our DNA called telomeres. They're like the plastic. An analogy often offered is they're like plastic end caps on our shoelaces, those aglets that they're called, that wear down over time through stress, through overuse and stress. And eventually, when they're worn down altogether, the shoelace is useless because you can't poke it through the wee eyelet. You have to, make a wee, wet it and twist it round. But anyway, you get the point that they wear down through stress. Now, telomeres do something similar. They also wear down through the stresses and strains of life, and that wearing down is known as telomere attrition. And it's known that telomere attrition happens faster when we're struggling with stress in our lives. But we also know from kindness and compassion-based meditation practices where people have these psychological and then physiological experiences of kindness by thinking kindly, we also know that slows down the rate of telomere attrition. And these kind of effects happen regardless of what age you are. It's not just particular age groups that benefit from this. In fact, some recent research even looked at adolescents and found that also in adolescents, when they showed what the researchers called helping behaviours or pro-social behaviours, it also mitigated the effects of stressors in our lives. And that's true for adolescents, for adults, right through to our elderly years in life. So, if you're finding yourself under stress during the day, I know it's useful sometimes to go and try to relax. Absolutely, keep doing that. But maybe also bear in mind, try kindness, help someone, and just see how you get on. You're doing them a favour, but also notice how it makes you feel as well. Because what we know is when we help each other, we're biologically wired in this way. It's like nature is saying, yes, this is what we're supposed to do. And part of what I call nature's reward is that some of the physiological sting of stress gets mitigated a little bit physiologically, but also in our minds, also in the way it feels. It takes the psychological weight of some of these stressful events in our life. I'm not meaning, I don't know if that happens right across the board. Sometimes things are just too heavy, stress. But for most things in our lives, the opposite of stress is kindness. So if you're struggling with stress, as well as the other things you're doing to manage it, also try kindness and see how you get on.